Okay, and here we go. So, welcome to the second podcast done here in the Nomad town in the Resilience Hub located in eastern Finland near the town Joensuu. The first podcast by Markus and Nettle had probably given you, if you have listened to it, some information. If you have not listened to it, please find the link in the descriptions. So, the first podcast, Markus was introducing about the stop and the idea of resilience hubs. And in this podcast, we want to pick up the thread a little bit from there and go into edges. What are the edges in our society? What edges should we explore and how do we explore it? And with me here in the yurt are sitting Ue and Emilia. Hello Ue, hello Emilia.
Hello.
Hello.
And so what are we talking about? We just talked that is it okay to talk about pooping?
Yeah.
Why is pooping so interesting?
It's important part of your life.
Right, as much as food is.
Yeah. And unconventional pooping might be quite confusing for some people.
What would you consider as what do you consider as unconventional pooping?
Well, for me, there's not that kind of pooping, but what I have been talking with people who used to go to toilets where is water and stuff like that. They somebody has really been asking from me that how do you poop in the forest?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And
Right.
and it's like, well,
Yeah.
just poop. So I think it's important to talk about it
Yeah.
because people may not ask that so easily.
I might explain, like when we are talking about the edges that we explore, like this is like pooping into the forest is outside of the comfort zone for many people. I personally consider unconventional pooping. I consider this to poop into perfectly good drinking water and mix that small amount of perfectly good drinking water with perfectly usable grey water and turn it all into perfectly resource intense, hard to clean black water. I find that highly unconventional, like big infrastructure connected to this way of pooping.
Yeah.
What do you, Emilia, consider as unconventional pooping?
Well, now I find pooping in forest a lot more enjoyable than in regular toilet. 1 year ago, I didn't know how to do it.
I'll give a little instructable if anybody feels like I want to try how it is to poop in the forest. First, you want to know what you have in your guts, right? You want to know, have you eaten anything that has a lot of chemicals in it, additives, hormones, something that shouldn't be there, something that does not belong in the local environment. If you find anything in there, so the question is, do you have anything in your guts that the local environment has problems to deal with? That's pretty much the case if you have food from the supermarket inside of you. And then it's good or respectful towards other species to make a decent hole in the ground, lift some heavy rocks into the side, and then you just squat over there and spread the buttocks and let gravity do the job. It's like a lot cleaner than actually sitting on the other toilet where your guts are kinked when you try to do the business. So, and then it's important to fill the hole with soil and like the rocks again, so that other animals cannot dig it up and eat it, because they should not face these components that are in our poop. So that was a little excursion into pooping. We are talking about the edge today in this podcast, and do we have anything to add to the pooping? Oh, big question. Yes, toilet paper. Many people don't know that over half of the world's population does not use toilet paper. So, like, if you're a toilet paper user, you're clearly an outsider. right? You're not part of the in crowd, and that can also be a challenge because for people that if you want to look at your water footprint, just skip the toilet paper, right? Use a water flush to water bottle to do the cleaning, and you will actually use less water than as if you would use toilet paper, because the paper needs quite a lot of water in the production. So using water to clean your behinds requires less water than using toilet paper. So the edge we are talking about. I start with talking a little bit about permaculture. If you don't know what permaculture is, or have never heard the term permaculture before, permaculture is the idea of basically a permanent culture for growing food. But it's not about only growing food, it's also about having increased biodiversity. So if you grow one crop on one area of land, you don't have much biodiversity, but you might have high productivity. And the permaculture goes in the direction of having a good biodiversity, at the same time also satisfying productivity, and doing so in a way that it is as close to how nature in this place would be if humans would not interfere. So here in Finland, or in the place people call Finland, a permaculture would look a lot like forest, like in most places. So using of trees and bushes and other things. So it's not so much about choosing what is growing, but like knowing what is growing and knowing different uses for the different things that are growing there. And yeah, ideally a permaculture doesn't need the perfect permaculture is just harvesting, mostly harvesting, not much planting work to do. In the moment we are trying to get some permaculture principles incorporated here in our growing areas in the Nomad town. But there's something about the permaculture principle that has to do with the edges. And if you think of the natural edge in natural habitats, like the edge between a pond and the land, for example, you will find on this edge area species that only live in this edge area. You also find species that only live on the land and species that only live in the water. But near the edge, the border between the two, you will find that all species can be found there. So if you have the three areas, land, water, edge, all species can be found in this edge area because there's an overlap. And here in the Nomad town, we start to see that we are also on the edge of the city of Joensuu. So we have moose going through this area, but we also have cars going through this area. And we have aeroplanes flying over and ravens flying over, and we have and eat plants that come from the forest, and we eat plants that come from what we have planted here. So we see that this edge, we should increase this edge. Like, this is an important place to be. And also when we think about the edge of our society. And before we go into the edge of our society, I would like to introduce a tool to you that we are using here. That's the stop tool, or the full moon full stop. By the way, I just remember in the beginning, or in the end, I should have mentioned that this podcast, now I mentioned it in the middle somewhere, or you're still in the beginning. So this podcast comes into existence with the help of Bridge 47, a global citizenship education program by the EU. So we got some funding for making podcasts like this, for example. Thank you for this help. I hope it helps with the global citizenship education. So nothing.
Yeah, nothing.
So what we just had a little pause to discuss how we continue, and to give you an idea, listener, wherever you're sitting, I hope that you are actually listening to this and not watching a screen. But yeah, the idea is that you can listen and just to do something outside or be outside and or look at the window. So here in the Nomad town, we're using a tool that we call the full moon full stop. And this tool has its origins in a survival tool called Stop, S-T-O-P. The original version is Stop, Think, Observe, Plan. So it's a tool that helps people in survival situations to avoid panic and to make decisions that are as good as possible looking at the situation. And as a survival instructor myself, I've been teaching this tool for many years, but I have not been using it or never had to use it because, of course, with survival training, my comfort zone, I would not call something a survival situation that might appear for others a survival situation. But at some point I realized that it might be quite good to take this tool and look at the modern life, my modern life, the human experience of living in a house in Eastern Finland, Western Europe. And what I found is that there's very good reason to use this tool, and we adopted this and now been using this for over 2 years, and the Nomad town is a direct result of using this tool. And it goes like this: the full moon full stop. So first of all, it's happening on a full moon. The idea is that with big variety of beliefs on this planet, we don't have the sacred day anymore, which in some religions might be the Sunday, the Thursday, Friday, or the Saturday. So we don't have the sacred day anymore, the day where we stop and think and I don't know, be spiritual also. And the full moon day is something that is neutral of all kinds of borders, neutral of religions, of origins, of how you look, what sex you prefer, whatever. So the full moon is a neutral phenomena, and it's global and on the same day. So we chose to also the full moon because it's of its significance to human life in general, like the cycles that we have in our bodies, they're connected to the moon. And the moon has always played a big role in our lives, so we are still like counting the months of the year with the moon. And so on full moon day, what we do is we stop. So we have changed the abbreviation from just stop to also sit down, go on strike if needed, or if it's a work day on this day, and create an environment where you can think. That's the T in the abbreviation. And the T also stands for thank, for gratitude, and for drinking tea. So we make it quite comfortable for us and start to thank and think. And we think in particular about our 6 survival priorities. Are they covered in a sustainable manner or not? Because if they're not covered, then we actually have a survival situation. So the idea of the T is to find out, do we have a survival situation, yes or no? And if we find out that we do have one, then we continue with the O. So the 6 survival priorities are food, water, air, shelter, community, and health. So these 6 priorities need to be covered in a sustainable way, otherwise we don't survive. And when we look at our society, we are currently living in a phase of human history where our offspring is well advised not to copy the parents' lifestyles anymore. We are the first species where it is suicidal almost, it is pretty much suicidal to copy the parents' lifestyle. And we have to explore new terrains. We have to look what options we have to change this. And this is where the O comes into play. O means observe, orientate, what options we have, what opportunities. Basically an inventory is what is already good, what needs to be improved, what can we copy paste from elsewhere. And that's, there's like quite often a lot of work, especially when you start with using this tool. It might feel very overwhelming, but it can be very good to focus on one of the survival priorities only. And then also when we go to the P, is the plan. So, and in the P, there's also the positive. So as in the T, gratitude opened our mind for positive thinking, the P is like a logical follow-up on this to choose being positive, because we have a lot of evidence from people who have survived survival situations with similar odds than people who did not survive survival situations, simply because they chose to believe that they can do it, simply because they tried it and had hope, did not give up, and basically chose happiness. They chose to be positive. And so that's a crucial part of the P, the choice of positivity, the choice of happiness on this one, and then making a plan for the next month. So not much longer, to allow for seeing results also, and also to make it easier to find steps that you can that you can take, that are likely, that you can understand that you can have a success in this. So making 1 month's plans. And so with this tool we are pushing ourselves, or pulling ourselves, extending our edge. And in the case here of the in case of the Nomad town, we are pulling this edge by looking at what do we really need, what do we want, what do we need, what is need to have, what is nice to have. And the stop helps us with this. Also, like, being in a group helps a lot with this. Like, there's a bit of peer support in the group. But it's certainly a tool of pulling, because it's like the motivation is yourself, and it's not something where some government tells you, do it like this, do it like that, and this is what you need to do. Or if you now fly with the aeroplane, you have to pay 200% taxes on your tickets. It's not that kind of pressure tool. So in that sense, it gives solutions that fit to personal level, locally, and we think it's a very good tool, and we recommend it. And so when we think now going back to the situation in society, where we have a situation where survival does not happen, also where life and thrival doesn't seem to happen, at least not in the within the limits of our desire, then we are well advised, if we don't also know what to do and how to do things, to just maybe do nothing for a day per month. But we for sure have to explore alternatives. We have to extend our edges, and also, I believe, blur these edges so that the edges become more invisible. And I'm talking about the edges between the modern human experience and the rest of the natural world. Because we are still trapped in the idea to think that nature is something happening outside of the city or outside of the human body. And we are vastly disconnected with nature around us, nature in the people next to us, and also nature inside of ourselves. And that might be one where also it helps a lot to not live in the city. Yes, so these edges around ourselves we need to make disappear, basically, I believe. And resilience hubs can be, I think, very helpful tools for this. The stop tool can be very helpful, and very helpful is also the sit spot, having a spot where you go to sit every day and get to know the other animals and other species who are living there. So, from the full moon full stop and the use of the stop tool in general, the adaptation of the stop tool here in the Nomad town, we're going back to the edges. And one of the things that I think really can help us to get beyond the edge is when we choose one of the survival priorities and decide to work on them and make big steps, and dare to explore adventurous terrain, go into areas where we don't have experience, where there is no relative who can tell us how to do it. And in my own case, I chose to put my attention to shelter and community, those two survival priorities. And now since last August, I'm living in a yurt in eastern Finland, and so far I totally don't regret it. I just don't wonder why I didn't do this earlier. A couple of things about shelters. Like, the purpose of a shelter is to keep you warm, dry, and safe. So under the category of shelter also falls a parachute. When you're falling from an aeroplane, if you don't have a parachute, you have a shelter problem, but you don't have a water problem. So it's a survival priority shelter that is lacking a crucial component. A rescue boat can be a shelter, a dry suit can be a shelter, for short times, of course, but they keep you dry and safe and in the right temperature. So for more permanent living, when we look at the shelters we are living in the moment, the average in Europe is over 40 square meters of floor space per person. And most of these spaces are always using energy. So when we are outside, not at home, these spaces are heated or ventilated. When we are living in a house and there's an upstairs and the downstairs, we are spending time downstairs, the upstairs rooms are heated or ventilated. So they always use energy, and that energy needs to come from somewhere. So there's very clever houses like the Earthship design, for example, using a lot of like energy that you can find in the area around, using the sun, using energy stored in the soil. For example, in my experience, I find that small shelters are a very good way to start. So now I'm living here 25 square meters with, most of the time 3 people, and that's so far working. What about shelter? So Emilia here, you are living also in a small shelter?
Yes, I live in a tiny van. Before living in a van, I lived with my parents in a city, in a house. But surprisingly, I found out that I really don't need space a lot at all, just for sleeping, or something for cooking. I'm really surprised how little you actually need. And it's quite enjoyable as well. I don't like to use furniture. I like sitting on the ground and cooking, and yeah. Talk about myself.
Okay, so when you live in your van,
Yes.
like, what is a common thing that people ask you when they ask you where you're from? What do you say?
Well, that one is hard because.
Or where do you live?
Yeah. Well, usually the first question is that, oh, you're a woman, you're alone. How do you deal with that? But I actually I've always felt really safe. I never had any situations where I felt unsafe or that I needed someone. The second one is the space thing. How is it possible to do everything in that tiny space?
How tiny is that space? Have you ever calculated how many square meters of living space you have?
No. But it's a car that comes with 7 seats. Tila-auto in Finnish. So it's not a lot.
So it's like a space wagon, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in it. I would assume it's less than 5 square meters or something.
Maybe I would say it's maybe 6 square meters. But there's also front seats.
Yeah, and now I'm running my business from the car as well. If I didn't have my business,
You'd have so much space.
Yeah. Too much, really.
So and your business is you're making things, right?
Yeah.
But that's a bit of a understatement. Like, you're not just making things, from what I have observed, you have a nice way of turning something that you might call an ordinary item that you find somewhere and turning them into pieces of art.
Yeah, and even with that, like I used to have a big table to do work and lots of tools, but right now I have you can't really call it a table, it's a tiny bench and a few tools, and I have no problem with it.
If you could change something on your shelter, what would that be?
Well, the most annoying thing at the moment is that I'm living in a car, which means that it needs gas, and that's something that I don't really like.
But how could you? I mean, like that means either you settle down or you get rid of the engine and find some other way of locomotion.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to figure out at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, at the same time, probably like being able to move quite easily is a big plus as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I mean, when you think about motorized transportation, it's not a survival priority. It's a tool for making things, for covering priorities these days. Originally, we had the transportation built in by walking or bicycling later. But when you think that most cars these days, 95% of the time, they're just standing around. And most distances in Finland are collected, most kilometers over the year of all people driving cars in Finland are collected on distances under 60 kilometers. And that's, I guess, not your average distance. You're not driving these short distances. You're probably more driving longer distances. So you're not very average car user. And your car is probably also standing most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a very nice one also, where we can see the feeling of exploring edges and extending edges. So if one looks at I don't know how some people spend their holiday in a totally legal and advertised way by burning the planet away under their feet, using fossil intense infrastructure like aeroplanes, or the highway network even, like then living in a van that has an engine seems to be like nothing. But when you are set out to explore your edges and strive to meet reality and live sustainably, like not just more sustainable, then it's like a thorn in the eye to have an engine under your bum that is using fossil fuels. I would like to ask you, like you have now also been living in this yurt here with your son the last winter, where I think most people would go like it's a question that I'm asked. Did you also live in the yurt in the winter? I was asked by many people. Something I would like to know: how is it for Puru? Like, how is it for your kid? Is that something where you like nowadays we have the idea that children need to have their own room and they need to have I don't know, a room with light switches and a tap where hot water comes out when you open it, and like
well we still, in fact we still have this, we pay rent for this 44 square meters apartment in an apartment building. In this apartment building we also have. It's in the city, and there's short distances to everywhere. But now I got confused. Sorry. But yeah, for him, when we are at yurt, he doesn't miss our apartment. And when we are in the city, he's like, when do we go to yurt? When do we go to yurt? And he's 4 years old now, so there's not. He doesn't think. Maybe he's not yet in the age that he thinks that something is like normal or way it should go. So he's open-minded and he lives in the moment, and he lives in a yurt quite happily. In fact, he's like, when we go more rarely and rarely nowadays, when we go in city, he's like, no, I don't want to go to shower, but here he feels like it's becoming normal to him to wash himself without running water or switching lights on. And he's like, he understands that if it's cold, he needs to wear more or make fire to get warm. So and he doesn't feel like it's difficult or uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think this is the best environment for kids to grow in.
Yeah.
'Cause I've seen lots of kids who grow like this, and they always seem the happiest.
Yeah.
And also he has toys in our apartment and stuff like that, but I think he plays here more freely and happily, and he doesn't need those toys to make a good play.
Yeah, I'm thinking how many children are living somewhere in a small box, in a big box, like apartments, in apartment buildings, and don't have the freedom to just go outside of the door, just one door between the basically bedroom and the outside, or the living room or the kitchen and the outside. And like here he can play very safely, and he does play very creatively, and I really agree, it's like best possible.
Yeah, and he's so wonderful. When we are at our apartment at morning, he goes to balcony, or he went before we needed to close balcony door because of downstairs neighbors and their perfumes. But earlier in spring, when it wasn't so hot, he at morning first thing he went to balcony and yelled there, "Good morning, world!" and like he goes out in the yurt. It's, I think we are created that way, that we need to have a possibility to go out easily, not like it's an operation to get out of the door, and there is elevators and steps and doors and neighbors and stuff like that, and it's
and cars.
and cars. Yeah, of course, there is also cars you can drive to playing park or hoplop or dog park or whatever.
But I mean also, like when he gets out of the door, there's a parking
there's
lot.
There is and it's, I notice our lives in city is different. There is need for car different way. I have a car and we change places with it and yeah.
So when you think about like your own edge, like your own comfort zone from when you first started to spend time here in the yurt until now, like has something changed there? Do you feel that you extended the edge of your comfort zone, or is it a different one?
That's a bit tricky to think. There is, of course, in the yurt there is things, for example, cold nights that are challenging sometimes. But and water is an issue for me with my very sensitive sense of smell. I feel that there's something wrong with the water, and also washing is something I feel like sometimes living on the edge. I've been used to go to shower and or sauna, and it's so easy way to wash yourself, and when there is not that option, it's not that easy. In winter it was quite easy to go just on the snow, but for somehow I feel snow was easier than take a swim. Yeah.
Yeah, I just throw this information in here about our water. We have well water that has a smell and a taste to it, but it was tested and found to be okay. So the smell and the taste is still there, which we are seeing as a challenge, something to solve, something to figure out. And also the sauna, if anybody who is listening now and is into building or recycling, we need help here with building. We want to have a mobile sauna, like a wagon or trailer or so. And what we like to do here in the Nomad town is to use as much recycling and natural materials as possible. And ideally also avoid the use of money, unless somebody gives us money that we can use, then we can use that money also. So.
And also for me, it's the air quality is really important. I feel living in the city is living in the edge. It's for me, it's like out of my comfort zone. As I mentioned earlier, our downstairs neighbors use really strong perfumes, and the smell comes from their balcony to our balcony and inside from the open window. So I got sick from a mold, and I have MCS also now because of that. And living in the city is quite adventure with need to breathe and with all people smelling and using perfumes and being there. So for me it's quite easy to be in here with nature without all those chemicals. It's easier here.
Something that, like, if I think about the last, almost year from now, like, of this life in the yurt here, is that my first reason to actually make this step was I understood that the previous lifestyle I was living in a house, that it was impossible to make it sustainable. Like, even if we had everything going to, I don't know, heating everything with wood and making all our own electricity, we would still require more firewood than we could possibly transport by bicycle alone. So it would not be fossil free or sustainable, CO2 neutral. And so something that I was aware of was that there is need for community. That I need community, but also others need community. And so my attention was not only on shelter, but also community. And it seems like that even though I had the focus on shelter primarily, community kind of came along with it. So the Sydänlanka Association is, of which the Nomaton is a project, or a child, or I don't know what it is. And the people with the association came along, and then also people came who just heard about the Nomad town, and people then also stayed, and came back. And Emilia is one of them, and I'm so happy that you came back yesterday here. You have been here before midsummer. And before we finish, so we have some 5 more minutes I would like to explore a little bit the community sense, and maybe also in the end leave a question mark to the listener, so that we keep the listener curious for the next podcasts. And because it's very exciting times here. We learn so much, and we have a very interesting experiment coming up in July, a 1 month experiment of not using fossils, not making rubbish, and not using money as well. We have done that 2 years ago for the first time, and we want to make a follow-up this year. Hope to get enough people for this. Very exciting. But what's your feeling about community? Like when I ask people about what do you think are our 6 survival priorities, people mention fire, which belongs to shelter. People mention food, and people mention all kinds of things. But health and community, usually they come very last. So what is your impression? Is community a survival priority that deserves so much attention?
I think it is. Living just 2 of us with my child, and although there has been people around us, but not like community, it has been a stressful time. So in here I feel community very valuable thing. Yeah, and it's like I'm on the edge with this, with child sometimes just alone, and it's important to have other people also when you feel like your brain will explode or something, and it's not that stressful, and it's also that I feel that I have some skills or something to give to community, and it gives me the feeling that I am important. It's a different way of feeling that I am important, and I can do something for others also.
How do you feel about community, Emilia?
Well, I actually really enjoy my alone time, and I'm kind of a hermit, I guess you could say. But I'm also the most happiest when I'm able to give, and I like to see that what I'm creating and what I'm doing is like also helping others.
Yeah, I think it's easy to underestimate the importance of community. It's the only survival priority that can back up for lack of the other ones. And when I think of time where it's just Ur and me and Buru here, taking care of a 4-year-old who is like full of energy and exploring everything and has no single peaceful moment, or well, he has peaceful moments, but he can really make sure that we don't. Then it's hard to build up, like a mobile eco village. That's what we are building up here. Same time, so taking care of building shelters and infrastructure and growing food and getting things going and doing firewood, and there's so many things to do here. It's unbelievable. Like there's so much to do, very overwhelming. But at the same time, as soon as there's one more person here, it's basically half the workload already for 2 people. And I think that's like very nice one to see and to observe, and something that I think might be also good to be aware of. If you live in an apartment building, or if you live whatever situation, wherever, it's the connection to the neighbors that might be like the most valuable steps to or valuable part of a future which might be sustainable, to have good networking and good sharing culture and good greeting customs with the neighbors. So we are ending the podcast. We're coming to the 45-minute mark in a few seconds. I would like to thank everyone who was here, including Puru, who managed to keep us doing this podcast here without too many interruptions. Very grateful. And Ua and Emilia, thank you very much for this. Do you have anything you want to say before we push the red button here?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that was it from here. If you want to come and visit, please come and visit. Let us know before. And if you have questions or want to do some kind of cooperations or networking or want to find ways how you can support us, please do so. Please reach out to us. There will be in the descriptions below some contacting details. And then we are happy to help and happy to cooperate and be beneficial with each other. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.